"You picked the wrong family," the calm voice said from somewhere inside the growing crowd. But by then no one seemed to know who had spoken, and every pair of eyes remained fixed on the elderly black couple standing beside an aging blue sedan beneath the bright Carolina afternoon sun. The neighborhood was quiet just moments earlier, its tree-lined streets washed in golden light, the kind of peaceful Saturday that smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass and backyard barbecue. Then the flashing patrol lights shattered the calm, painting red and blue reflections across polished driveways and carefully trimmed hedges. Samuel Brooks tightened his grip on the small paper pharmacy bag in his hand, careful not to crush the bottles of heart medication inside. At 72 years old, he had spent more than 4 decades teaching American history to high school students, believing that patience usually carried more strength than anger. Beside him stood his wife, Dorothy Brooks, her silver curls moving gently in the warm breeze as she clutched her purse with both hands. Neither of them had raised their voices. Neither had argued. They had simply answered every question the officers asked. Yet the questions kept coming. Officer Ethan Walker walked slowly around the old sedan, his polished boots tapping against the pavement as though he had already decided the answers before hearing them. His expression carried the confidence of someone who expected everyone nearby to accept his judgment without hesitation. "Whose car is this?" he asked again, glancing at the faded paint and worn tires. Samuel reached carefully into his wallet, moving slowly enough that no one could mistake his intentions. "It belongs to us, officer. Registration is inside the glove compartment." Walker barely looked at him before shaking his head. "Stay where you are." Dorothy exchanged a quiet glance with her husband. They had driven this same sedan for nearly 18 years. The seats were cracked from summer heat, the dashboard carried tiny scratches from countless road trips, and the rearview mirror still held a small wooden cross their granddaughter had carved years before. Nothing about the vehicle was remarkable except the memories it carried. A growing circle of neighbors gathered along the sidewalks, whispering to one another while pretending not to stare. Several phones appeared above the crowd, their cameras silently recording every passing second. Samuel noticed them but kept his eyes lowered. He had spent his life teaching young people that dignity mattered most when it felt hardest to keep. "We were only driving to Mercy General," Dorothy said softly. "My husband needs these prescriptions before 5. Walker didn't answer. Instead, he leaned toward the windshield, studying the parking permit hanging from the mirror as though searching for a reason to doubt everything in front of him. Another patrol car rolled quietly onto the street, stopping several yards behind the first. 2 additional officers stepped out, exchanging brief looks before approaching. The atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Conversations faded. Birds that had been singing from the oak trees seemed to disappear into silence. Even the wind felt slower. Samuel noticed Dorothy's fingers trembling ever so slightly. He reached over and gently covered her hand with his own. "It's all right," he whispered, his voice carrying the same reassuring warmth that had once calmed nervous students before final exams. "We'll answer their questions, and we'll be on our way." Dorothy forced a small smile, though worry lingered behind her eyes. She had learned long ago that fear often arrived quietly, never announcing itself with loud voices or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it simply settled into the stillness between ordinary moments. Officer Walker finally turned back toward them. "Dispatch says a vehicle matching this description was reported suspicious entering this neighborhood about 20 minutes ago." Samuel blinked. "Suspicious?" Walker folded his arms. "That's what I said." Samuel looked down the peaceful street lined with expensive homes whose spotless windows reflected the afternoon sun. "Officer," he replied gently, "we've been bringing groceries to my sister every Saturday for nearly 3 years. She lives 2 blocks away." Walker's expression remained unreadable. "That isn't what I asked." Somewhere behind the crowd, a car door quietly closed. No one noticed the dark SUV pulling to the curb. No one noticed the woman stepping out, her posture steady, her eyes instantly finding the elderly couple surrounded by flashing lights. She said nothing. Not yet. She simply looked at the scene unfolding before her, took one slow breath, and began walking toward the gathering as every second carried her closer to a moment that would change every life on that quiet street. Naomi Brooks did not hurry. Every step across the warm asphalt was measured, almost effortless. as though she had learned long ago that panic only made noisy situations louder. The late afternoon sun rested low above the rooftops, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street, while the flashing patrol lights continued to pulse against polished garage doors and white picket fences. She noticed everything before anyone noticed her. Officer Walker stood closest to her parents, shoulders squared and jaw tight. Another officer remained beside the patrol cruiser, speaking softly into a shoulder radio. Several neighbors watched from their front lawns, pretending to water flowers while stealing anxious glances toward the growing crowd. Samuel spotted his daughter first. His tired face softened with relief for only a heartbeat before concern returned to his eyes. He gave the smallest shake of his head, silently asking her not to make the situation harder than it already was. Naomi understood immediately. Since childhood, her father had believed that calm voices solved more problems than raised ones. Even now, surrounded by strangers and suspicion, he refused to surrender that belief. Dorothy turned next, her expression brightening as she whispered, "Naomi." It was barely louder than the rustling leaves overhead, but hearing her mother's voice made Naomi smile gently. She walked directly toward them without changing pace, carrying nothing except a set of car keys and a reusable grocery bag that still held fresh peaches from the farmer's market across town. She stopped several feet away, careful to respect the space between herself and the officers. "Good afternoon," she said evenly. "I am Naomi. Brooks, those are my parents. Is there something I can help clarify?" Officer Walker looked her up and down for only a second before answering. "This is an active investigation. Stand back." Naomi nodded once. "I understand." There was no irritation in her voice, no challenge, only quiet patience. She shifted her attention toward Samuel. "Dad, are you both all right?" Samuel smiled faintly. "We are fine. They are asking questions." Dorothy tried to laugh, but it came out as a nervous breath instead. "Your father's medicine is getting warm sitting in that bag." Naomi glanced toward the pharmacy package resting on the hood of the sedan. The paper had begun to wrinkle beneath the afternoon heat. She looked back at her mother. "We will make sure you get home soon." Walker folded his arms. "You seem awfully confident." Naomi met his eyes without hesitation. "I am confident my parents are honest people." A faint murmur drifted through the crowd. Someone lowered a phone. Someone else quietly stepped closer to hear the conversation. Walker noticed the growing audience and straightened his posture. "We received a report about suspicious activity involving this vehicle." Naomi nodded again. "Did the report include a license plate number?" Walker paused briefly. "That information is not yours to question." Naomi accepted the answer without argument. "Understood." She reached into her pocket slowly, removed her driver's license, and held it where everyone could clearly see. "My address is the same as my parents' emergency contact information. If identifying our family helps clear up any misunderstanding, I am happy to cooperate." Walker took the card but barely glanced at it before handing it back. His attention lingered on Naomi herself instead, as though trying to decide why she remained so composed while everyone around her seemed increasingly uncomfortable. Naomi could feel dozens of curious eyes following every movement, yet her breathing never changed. The breeze carried the scent of blooming magnolias across the street, mixing strangely with the faint smell of warm engine oil from the patrol cars. Somewhere in the distance, church bells echoed the half-hour. Samuel watched his daughter with quiet pride. He had seen that calm before, years earlier, when she faced impossible exams, family hardships, and every obstacle life placed before her. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing with certainty. Naomi never confused silence with weakness. Officer Ethan Walker studied Naomi for another long moment, as though her calm unsettled him more than open frustration ever could. Around them, the quiet neighborhood had become strangely still. The only sounds were the distant hum of lawn mowers, the soft clicking of cell phone cameras, and the occasional chirp of birds hidden high among the oak branches. The afternoon sunlight reflected off the patrol cars, turning every chrome surface into sharp flashes of white light. Walker finally broke the silence. "You said this is your family. Then maybe you can explain why someone reported this vehicle driving slowly through private streets." Naomi answered without hesitation. "My aunt lives on Willow Creek Lane. My parents visit her almost every Saturday. They have followed the same route for years." Walker glanced toward another officer, who quietly checked a digital tablet before giving a small shrug that revealed nothing. That is not what the caller described, Walker replied. Samuel looked genuinely confused. Officer, we stopped once because Dorothy wanted to double-check the address on a birthday card before dropping it into a mailbox. That was less than a minute. Dorothy reached into the reusable grocery bag and carefully removed a sealed envelope decorated with colorful balloons. It is for my great-niece. She turns 8 tomorrow. She smiled gently, hoping the ordinary explanation would ease the tension, but Walker barely looked at the envelope before returning his attention to the aging sedan. He slowly circled the vehicle again, running his eyes across the faded paint, the worn bumper, and the neatly folded blanket resting on the back seat. Every detail appeared perfectly ordinary, yet he continued searching as though expecting something hidden beneath years of simple family life. Naomi noticed another neighbor quietly step forward from a nearby driveway. An older white woman, carrying a watering can, hesitated before speaking. Officer, I have seen this couple around here before. Walker raised one hand politely but firmly. Ma'am, please remain behind the sidewalk. The woman nodded and stepped back, although uncertainty remained on her face. Naomi watched the brief exchange without saying a word. She had learned years ago that people often revealed more through silence than through arguments. Walker stopped beside the driver's door and looked directly at Samuel. May I ask what you did before retirement? Samuel answered with the same patience that had carried him through thousands of classrooms. I taught United States history for 43 years. And your wife? Elementary school librarian. Dorothy replied with a soft smile. For nearly 38 years. One of the younger officers blinked in surprise. That is a long time. Dorothy nodded. Children deserve people who believe in them. The young officer looked away, almost embarrassed by her kindness. Walker remained unmoved. He folded his notebook shut with a quiet snap. Sometimes appearances can be misleading. Samuel gave a thoughtful nod. That is true, officer. That is exactly why I always told my students to gather facts before reaching conclusions. The words hung in the warm afternoon air. Several people in the crowd exchanged glances, sensing the quiet weight behind them. Walker's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked toward Naomi again. What do you do for a living? The question seemed simple enough, but every eye in the neighborhood shifted toward her at once. Samuel lowered his gaze. Dorothy gently rested one hand against her husband's arm. Naomi offered the faintest smile, one that revealed nothing beyond quiet confidence. I work for the United States government, she answered calmly. It was completely truthful, yet it explained almost nothing. Walker waited for more, expecting a title, an agency, or some additional detail that never came. Naomi remained perfectly still beneath the afternoon sun, neither volunteering information nor attempting to impress anyone. Her answer left the street suspended in another long silence, and for the first time since the patrol cars had arrived, Officer Walker found himself wondering whether the family standing before him was not nearly as ordinary as he had first believed. Officer Walker held Naomi's steady gaze for several seconds before slipping his notebook back into his pocket. The United States government is a pretty broad answer, he said. His tone remained controlled, but curiosity had begun replacing certainty. Naomi answered with the same quiet composure. It is also an accurate one. The remark was neither sarcastic nor defensive. It simply left no room for unnecessary explanation. A faint breeze stirred the maple leaves overhead, sending scattered shadows dancing across the pavement between the patrol cars. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler clicked rhythmically across a freshly cut lawn, its gentle sound almost strange against the heavy silence surrounding the Brooks family. Walker took one slow step closer. Then you should understand why we ask questions. I do, Naomi replied. I also understand why every answer deserves to be heard before conclusions are made. Samuel lowered his eyes for a moment, recognizing the same measured discipline his daughter had shown since childhood. She had never been the loudest person in any room. She simply possessed an unusual ability to remain calm when everyone else became emotional. Dorothy watched her daughter with quiet pride while smoothing the wrinkles from the pharmacy bag resting against the sedan. The medication inside was becoming warmer beneath the afternoon sun, but she refused to interrupt the conversation. A younger officer standing near the second patrol vehicle quietly shifted his weight before speaking for the first time. "Sir, dispatch just updated the call log." Walker turned. "What did they say?" The reporting party only mentioned an unfamiliar older vehicle driving slowly through the neighborhood. No theft was reported. No outstanding warrant. No description of criminal activity. Walker's expression barely changed, although several neighbors exchanged surprised glances. Naomi remained silent. She had no interest in embarrassing anyone. She simply listened. The young officer continued. "They also confirmed the license plate comes back registered to Samuel Brooks at his current address." Another long silence settled over the street. The afternoon light softened as thin clouds drifted across the sun, cooling the air just enough for Dorothy to let out a slow breath. Walker folded his arms again, unwilling to let the conversation end so easily. People sometimes register vehicles under their own names for different reasons. Samuel nodded respectfully. "That can happen." Walker looked toward Naomi once more. "You still have not told me exactly what you do." Naomi glanced briefly toward her parents before answering. "My profession is not relevant to why my parents stopped on this street." "Maybe not," Walker replied, "but I am asking anyway." Naomi offered a polite smile. "Then I respectfully choose to answer only questions related to today's situation." The response caught him off guard. It was courteous, entirely lawful, and impossible to argue with. Several people watching from nearby sidewalks quietly lowered their phones, sensing that the conversation had shifted in an unexpected direction. An elderly white man wearing a Veterans Association baseball cap slowly approached the edge of the gathering. He looked at Samuel and smiled. "Mr. Brooks?" Samuel recognized him almost immediately. "Michael." The older man laughed warmly. "You taught me history back in 1986. You convinced me to join the Marine Corps." Samuel's face brightened. "I remember you now." Michael turned toward the officers. "This man spent his whole life helping kids become better citizens. If he says he is here to visit family, I believe him." Walker thanked the veteran politely, but remained focused on Naomi. Something about her composure continued to trouble him. She neither demanded special treatment nor displayed fear. She stood with relaxed shoulders, steady breathing, and patient eyes that seemed to notice everything happening around them. Without realizing it, Walker found himself wondering where she had learned such remarkable self-control. Naomi simply waited, knowing that the truth often revealed itself when people were finally willing to slow down and listen. The quiet confidence surrounding the Brooks family should have ended the misunderstanding, yet the atmosphere somehow grew even heavier. Officer Walker glanced briefly toward the small crowd lining both sides of the street before turning back to Naomi. His voice remained professional, but a trace of frustration had begun slipping through each carefully chosen word. "You seem to know exactly what to say," he observed. Naomi answered without hesitation. "My father taught me that listening carefully is usually more valuable than speaking quickly." Samuel lowered his head with a faint smile, though concern still rested behind his tired eyes. He had hoped the conversation would already be over. Instead, the minutes continued stretching beneath the warm afternoon sky. Walker looked toward the younger officer. "Run her driver's license once more." The officer accepted it politely from Naomi and walked back toward the patrol vehicle. Naomi handed it over without resistance, her expression unchanged. She folded her hands loosely in front of her and waited. Dorothy quietly stepped closer to Samuel. "Are you feeling all right?" she whispered. Samuel nodded gently. "I am fine. I only wish we were already on our way to your sister's house." Dorothy reached into the grocery bag again and smiled sadly at the peaches resting inside. "She will wonder why we are late." Naomi heard every word but kept her attention on the officers. Across the street, the elderly Marine veteran remained standing beside the sidewalk, removing his cap as though instinctively showing respect to the family he knew. A few neighbors who had arrived out of curiosity were no longer whispering. Instead, several quietly questioned one another about why the situation continued when every explanation seemed to point toward a simple misunderstanding. A child riding a bicycle slowed near the corner before his mother gently guided him back toward their driveway. Even the neighborhood dogs had stopped barking, leaving only the distant hum of traffic several blocks away. The younger officer returned carrying Naomi's license. "Everything matches, sir," he reported. "Clean record. Current address. No outstanding issues." Walker accepted the card but did not immediately return it. Instead, he looked once more at Naomi. Government employee. Clean record. Calm under pressure. Interesting combination. Naomi answered softly. Most people are more complicated than they first appear. Walker slipped the license into his notebook instead of handing it back. I still have questions. Naomi remained respectful. Then I will continue answering those that relate to today's events. Her steady voice never rose above an ordinary conversation, yet something about its certainty made the street feel quieter than before. The younger officer shifted uneasily. Sir, based on everything we have verified, there does not appear to be any indication that. Walker gently interrupted him. We are not finished. The younger officer fell silent. Samuel noticed the exchange and slowly exhaled. Years spent teaching teenagers had shown him that pride often kept people from admitting simple mistakes. He silently hoped this afternoon would not become another lesson in that truth. Naomi's eyes briefly drifted toward the body cameras attached to each officer's uniform before returning to Walker. She said nothing about them. She simply noticed them, just as she noticed the patrol vehicle numbers, the names stitched above each pocket, the exact time displayed on the dashboard clock visible through the windshield, and the gathering clouds beginning to soften the sunlight overhead. Every detail quietly settled into her memory. Walker finally looked back toward her parents. For now, no one is leaving until I finish documenting everything. Samuel gave a respectful nod despite his disappointment. Naomi neither objected nor complained. She simply stood beside her parents, calm as ever, while somewhere far beyond the neighborhood, a black government SUV turned onto the main boulevard, moving steadily toward Willow Creek Lane, without anyone on that quiet street realizing it had anything to do with the woman patiently waiting beside the old blue sedan. The afternoon seemed to pause with them. Thick clouds drifted slowly across the sun, softening the bright Carolina light until the flashing. Patrol lights became the strongest colors on the quiet street. Their reflections rippled across the faded blue paint of Samuel's old sedan and shimmered faintly in the front windows of nearby homes. No one spoke for several long seconds. Naomi stood beside her parents with her shoulders relaxed, her breathing slow and steady, while the grocery bag rested against Dorothy's leg. A single peach rolled gently against another inside the bag every time the breeze nudged the paper. Samuel glanced toward his watch. Your Aunt Louise will think we forgot dinner, he said with a gentle smile that carried more kindness than frustration. Dorothy answered softly. She knows you have never forgotten a family meal in 50 years. Samuel chuckled quietly. There is always a first time. Even a few people standing across the street smiled at the exchange. Naomi looked at her parents and, for the first time since arriving, allowed herself to breathe a little deeper. They were safe. They were together. That mattered more than anything else. She carefully reached into the grocery bag and lifted one of the chilled bottles of water Dorothy always carried during summer afternoons. Without saying a word, she handed it to her mother first. Dorothy accepted it with grateful eyes before passing it to Samuel. He took one small sip and returned it to his wife. Their familiar routine, practiced through decades of marriage, unfolded naturally without discussion. Naomi smiled almost imperceptibly. Some habits were stronger than fear. Officer Walker watched the quiet family interaction from several feet away. He had expected impatience, arguments, perhaps demands for supervisors or lawyers. Instead, he saw an elderly couple sharing a bottle of water beneath gathering clouds, while their daughter remained composed enough to notice the smallest details around her. The scene did not fit the assumptions he had carried into the neighborhood only 30 minutes earlier, yet he struggled to let those assumptions go. The younger officer quietly approached him. Sir, he said in a low voice, dispatch confirmed again that there are no additional reports connected to this vehicle. Walker gave only a brief nod without responding. His eyes remained fixed on Naomi. She had not once interrupted him. She had not raised her voice. She had not challenged his authority. Somehow that made her harder to understand. Naomi slowly lifted her face toward the sky. The wind carried the scent of approaching rain mixed with blooming jasmine from a nearby garden. She had always noticed weather before most people did. Her father used to laugh that she could predict a storm better than the local news. Samuel followed her gaze upward. Looks like we might get rain before sunset. Probably within the hour, Naomi replied quietly. Dorothy smiled. Good. The tomatoes needed it. Another silence settled over the neighborhood, but this one felt different. It was no longer filled with tension alone. It carried reflection. The neighbors who had gathered out of curiosity now watched the Brooks family with growing respect. They saw patience instead of anger, dignity instead of resentment, and quiet grace where many expected confrontation. Naomi lowered her eyes once more and noticed a small American flag planted beside a flower bed near the sidewalk. Its edges fluttered gently in the afternoon breeze. For a brief moment, something thoughtful passed across her face before disappearing again beneath calm discipline. Far down the street, almost hidden behind rows of maple trees, the dark government sport utility vehicle continued its steady approach. It moved without sirens, without flashing lights, and without urgency, blending almost unnoticed into the peaceful neighborhood. None of the bystanders paid it any attention. Only Naomi briefly caught its reflection in the polished window of a parked pickup truck, and although her expression never changed, she quietly understood that the next few minutes were about to change the direction of the entire afternoon. The dark sport utility vehicle rolled quietly to the curb without flashing lights or dramatic urgency, its polished black paint reflecting the muted afternoon sky as it came to a smooth stop several yards behind the patrol cars. At first, almost no one paid attention. Another vehicle arriving on a suburban street was hardly unusual. After nearly an hour of questions, then the driver's door opened. A man wearing a neatly pressed Navy service uniform stepped onto the pavement, followed by a second uniformed officer carrying a slim leather portfolio. Neither hurried. Their movements were calm, deliberate, and practiced. The conversation across the street faded almost instantly. Officer Walker turned toward the newcomers, his expression tightening with cautious curiosity. The senior Navy officer scanned the scene only once before his eyes settled on Naomi. His posture changed immediately. He walked forward with measured confidence until he stopped several feet away from her. Without hesitation, he stood perfectly straight and offered a crisp military salute. "Commander Brooks," he said clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Apologies for arriving later than expected." The entire street seemed to freeze. Samuel closed his eyes for a brief moment, as though he had quietly hoped this part of his daughter's life would remain private a little longer. Dorothy looked from Naomi to the officer, then gently lowered her head with the familiar smile of a mother who had carried an important secret for many years. Naomi calmly returned the salute before speaking. "Thank you for coming, Captain Ellis." Her voice remained exactly as steady as it had been since she first stepped onto the street. She neither looked proud nor embarrassed. She simply acknowledged the greeting with quiet professionalism. Captain Ellis glanced respectfully towards Samuel and Dorothy. "Sir, ma'am, it is an honor to finally meet you." Samuel smiled politely. "The honor belongs to those who serve." Ellis answered with genuine warmth. "Commander Brooks has served this country with extraordinary distinction for many years. We all know exactly who taught her integrity." A heavy silence settled across the gathering. The younger officer standing beside Walker blinked twice before looking back toward Naomi with entirely different eyes. Several neighbors slowly lowered their phones, realizing they had just witnessed something none of them expected. Even the Marine veteran standing near the sidewalk quietly removed his cap once again. Officer Walker remained motionless. "Commander," he repeated, almost to himself. Ellis turned toward him with calm professionalism. "Commander Naomi Brooks, United States Navy. Naval Special Warfare." Walker looked back at Naomi, searching her face for some sign that the words were exaggerated. There was none. She stood exactly as she had all afternoon, hands relaxed, shoulders level, her expression composed. Nothing about her had changed. Only everyone else's understanding had. Ellis accepted the leather portfolio from his colleague and opened it carefully. Inside rested official identification and travel documents. He closed the portfolio again without displaying them publicly. There was no need. His confidence alone spoke louder than paperwork. Commander Brooks was scheduled to report for an official briefing this evening. Ellis explained evenly. When she informed us there had been an unexpected delay involving her elderly parents, we came to ensure everything was all right. Naomi quietly looked toward her mother. Dorothy still held the slightly crumpled grocery bag against her side. The peaches remained inside, untouched. Samuel's prescription bag rested exactly where it had before the questions began. Naomi gently smiled at both of them before speaking for the first time since Ellis arrived. Mom, Dad, we will still make it to Aunt Louise's dinner. Her father smiled back. I never doubted that. Walker slowly exhaled, the certainty that had carried him through the afternoon dissolving beneath a truth he had never anticipated. The woman he had repeatedly questioned had never once relied on her rank, her accomplishments, or her position to influence the conversation. She had simply stood beside her parents as their daughter, asking only that they be treated with fairness and respect. No one spoke immediately after Captain Ellis finished. The neighborhood that had been filled with quiet whispers only minutes earlier now seemed wrapped in a different kind of silence, one shaped not by uncertainty, but by reflection. The flashing patrol lights continued to wash red and blue across the old sedan, yet they somehow felt less important than the simple image of Samuel and Dorothy Brooks standing side by side with their daughter. Officer Walker slowly looked from Naomi to Captain Ellis and then back again. The confidence that had guided every question throughout the afternoon had given way to something far more difficult to face. He realized that the woman before him had never attempted to use her position to influence the encounter. She had not mentioned her service. She had not introduced herself by rank. She had not asked anyone to make a phone call on her behalf. She had simply stood beside her elderly parents because that was where she believed she belonged. Captain Ellis quietly stepped back, allowing the conversation to become personal again. Naomi looked toward Officer Walker with the same calm expression she had carried since the beginning. There was no anger in her eyes, no satisfaction at the sudden change in the atmosphere, only a quiet patience that seemed almost impossible after everything that had happened. Walker removed Naomi's driver's license from his notebook and carefully extended it toward her with both hands. Commander Brooks, he said, his voice noticeably softer than before. I should have listened more carefully from the beginning. Naomi accepted the license with a small nod. Thank you. Walker hesitated before continuing. Your parents deserved a smoother afternoon than this. Samuel smiled gently before Naomi could answer. Officer, every difficult day gives us another chance to become wiser tomorrow. Walker looked at the elderly teacher, surprised that kindness was still the first response offered to him. Dorothy stepped forward slightly, still holding the grocery bag that had traveled through the entire afternoon with them. She smiled warmly. People make mistakes. What matters is what they choose to learn afterward. Those words seemed to settle over everyone standing nearby. The younger officer quietly lowered his eyes, while several neighbors who had recorded the encounter slowly slipped their phones back into their pockets. The Marine veteran walked over to Samuel and gently shook his hand. You taught me about honor when I was 17, he said. Looks like you are still teaching. Today, Samuel chuckled softly. Old teachers rarely retire completely. Even Captain Ellis allowed himself a quiet smile. Walker drew a slow breath before speaking one last time. I will be documenting everything exactly as it happened, including the updates from dispatch and the cooperation your family showed throughout the entire encounter. Naomi nodded. That is all anyone should ever ask. She paused briefly before adding, respect works best when it is given before someone has to earn it. The sentence was spoken so gently that it sounded less like criticism and more like a lesson offered without judgment. Walker lowered his head for a brief moment, understanding exactly what she meant. The first cool drops of rain finally began to fall, leaving tiny dark circles across the pavement and the hood of the old blue sedan. Dorothy laughed quietly as she looked upward. I told you the tomatoes would get their rain. Samuel reached over and took the grocery bag from her hands before opening the passenger door with the same quiet care he had shown throughout their long marriage. Around them, the tension that had held the neighborhood captive all afternoon slowly dissolved into the soft rhythm of summer rain, while those who had witnessed the encounter carried home something far more lasting than the memory of flashing lights. They carried the reminder that true strength rarely announces itself. It simply stands beside the people it loves and refuses to leave. The rain never became a storm. It settled gently over the neighborhood like a quiet blessing, washing away the heat that had lingered all afternoon and leaving tiny silver drops clinging to the leaves of the old maple trees. Samuel eased himself into the passenger seat of the blue sedan while Dorothy carefully placed the grocery bag between them, making certain the peaches were still intact. She smiled when she noticed they were. Looks like they survived the adventure, she said with a soft laugh. Samuel looked over at her and smiled the way only someone married for half a century could. Just like us. Naomi quietly closed the passenger door before walking around the front of the car. For a brief moment, she rested one hand on the faded hood, her fingers tracing the familiar paint that had carried her family through birthdays, graduations, church picnics, and countless Sunday dinners. It was never just an old car. It was home on four wheels. Captain Ellis approached one last time. "Commander, the briefing can wait until tomorrow morning. I have already made the necessary arrangements." Naomi nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Captain." Ellis smiled. "Some responsibilities are greater than schedules." He glanced toward Samuel and Dorothy. "Please enjoy your evening together." With that, he returned to the government vehicle, leaving without another word. There were no dramatic farewells, no unnecessary ceremony, only quiet respect. Officer Walker remained standing beside his patrol car as the rain continued to fall. He watched Naomi open the driver's door, but gathered enough courage to speak once more. "Commander Brooks." Naomi turned. "Yes, officer." He hesitated before continuing. "I hope that if our paths ever cross again, it will be under better circumstances." Naomi offered the same calm smile that had never left her throughout the afternoon. "So do I." She paused for only a moment before adding, "Every new day gives us another chance to meet each other with understanding instead of assumptions." Walker nodded slowly. "I will remember that." Naomi entered the sedan, and a moment later the old engine came to life with its familiar gentle rumble. It was not the sound of luxury or prestige. It was the sound of ordinary life continuing exactly where it had been interrupted. As the car rolled slowly down Willow Creek Lane, several neighbors quietly waved. Dorothy waved back through the passenger window with genuine warmth, as though nothing had happened except an unexpected delay before dinner. The Marine veteran stood beneath his umbrella and raised one final salute toward the family. Samuel returned it with a grateful nod. Within minutes, the flashing patrol lights disappeared from the street, leaving only the soft reflection of rain across the pavement. Children slowly returned to riding bicycles. Sprinklers resumed their steady rhythm. Porch lights flickered on as evening settled over the neighborhood. Life moved forward again, but the people who had witnessed that afternoon carried something new with them. They had expected to remember a traffic stop. Instead, they remembered an elderly teacher who answered suspicion with patience, a retired librarian who answered tension with kindness, and a daughter whose greatest strength was never the uniform she wore or the mission she had completed. Her greatest strength was that she never needed anyone to know who she was before choosing to do what was right. Long after the blue sedan disappeared around the corner, the rain continued falling softly across the empty street, washing away tire tracks, but leaving behind something no storm could erase. Respect is strongest when it is offered freely. Dignity is quiet enough to speak without raising its voice. And true character is revealed not when people discover your title, but in the moments before they ever know your name.